I would love to welcome Heily.
Whee!
Why product though?
Why product? Oh, that's a good question. And then I was like, hey, that's interesting, right? The space between technology and business, but also solving problems and all of the toolkits that you have as a product manager.
If you have to compare the product space 9 years ago versus today, what do you think is the main difference?
I think there is more information available, definitely. Like, we're in an information age.
People don't really talk about metrics, right? Like onboarding, we should look at these kind of metrics. For engagement, we should look at these kind of metrics. So for you, especially when you're building that product and improving that product, what is that metric? Okay. I would love to welcome Heily to this podcast. Heily, I'm so happy that
Loving
you're
it
here.
to be here. It's actually my first time to do a podcast, so super excited.
That's amazing. And I recently found out that you were in Mind Valley as well. Oh my God. We will talk about Mind Valley separately, not in this podcast, but would love to know about your experience and what did you build and what are we actually still using in the company? It's
Actually, I think
incredible.
I had a friend who joined Zalora not long ago, and then we joked that she actually found some Confluence pages and some things in Mind Valley that still had my name on it that I have as the creator. I was like, wow, okay, I think I had some legacy left there. It's fun.
Yes, you do. So, okay, let's start with understanding more about your career. How did you start your career? And right now you're working for Zalora. You're leading the B2B product. But before that, how did you start? Where are you originally from? And how did you end up in Malaysia?
Yeah, so come from Estonia, and I started my career there in a IT company as well as an intern for testing, actually. And then I became like analyst of software
Wow.
development. And then I had this amazing idea that I think it's time to come to Malaysia and work for Mindvalley. So it's kind of, like next step straight away,
Wow.
like after my first company. It was like one direction ticket, and it was very inspiring that time. I was like kind of craving to get out, to learn from the global companies. I always had this in my head, like world is my home kind of title. And I didn't know what it means that time, right? But then when this opportunity came, or thought came, then I was like, okay, I need to get there. So, and then I came to Mind Valley. I was working a little bit on operations side, but then I quickly went to customer support. And then from there, back to my IT route or technology route to product team in Mind Valley. And after that, I already joined Zalora, then joined product as well. So I've been doing software development my whole career. I studied business informatics in university.
Mm,
So this is literally like coding and
wow.
business, right? And how to put them together and how to make the best out of both. So yeah, and then that's been my whole career. And also in Zalora, I've been in the product space the whole while, building different products.
That's that's amazing. Why product
Why
though?
product? Oh, that's a good question. I think I started, it was more like business analyst and software analyst, right? So I was already on that path. Product management that time when I started my career wasn't the thing yet, or I didn't completely like understand it. I was like, well, people started to talk about it. I was like, don't quite get it. But then in Mind Valley, I was exposed to it. And then I was like, hey, that's interesting, right? The space between technology and business, but also solving problems and all of the toolkits that you have as a product manager. I feel like it really challenges your thinking and you can really make a difference, right, in any kind of company. Because it's always, I feel, in my personal opinion, right? Business looks at business, technology looks at technology. And then we are like, okay, let's try to figure out what's the best cut to kind of, make things to go to the outcome, right? So I think that's the answer for the product.
That's amazing. Yeah, because I also am involved in product here and there. And the reason for me to being involved is, of course, retention, right? I look at the retention side of things and I also look at the acquisition side of things. For you, especially when you look at product, do you think about the customer or what are your nuances that you think about before, let's say, building a new product?
Definitely, it is the customer, right? Even in the product world, anything you read about, right? It's all about the end consumer. Or for me, internally, actually, when I think about in Zalora's case, I have different kind of a customer, but I still think about them as a customer. So, for example, my warehouse workers, right, who use my software or our software, they are my users. I don't call them customers, but they are users. And I always encourage all of my product team to think about, so what do they think, feel, how they operate their world physically, right? And how do we build those solutions which will really help them? So that's why we also go down to the
Yeah.
warehouse. We go and observe them, right? To make sure that whatever we build is valuable for them. So we are very lucky because in that sense, my users are like arm's reach. I can drive to Shakalam and I can see, right? So others in the
Yes.
product areas with end consumers, you need to, of course, conduct your interviews, but there's still a bit of barrier there, I feel sometimes. So yeah, I always think about like what do they need as well. Different set of customers for me. Our users, of course, are all of our business stakeholders as well, because sometimes they are the users of our solutions as well, or then our B2B customers or clients, right? And sometimes my work also touches really the end customers. So it really depends on defining who you are building for and then tuning what you're doing based on that, right? Because all of them have different needs that they need to get done or resolutions and results they want.
Absolutely. And this is an interesting question for me because I've just been introduced to the product space, but you have been there for almost
Mm.
9 years.
Oh no.
So if I if you have to compare the product space 9 years ago versus today, what do you think is the main difference today versus then?
Wow. Wow. I think there's more information available, definitely. Like, we're in an information age. And there's more collaboration happening, I think, and learning across industries. Like, how do you do product in different spaces? And how do you apply it into also big companies? I think previously, when it started, it was all about, I mean, generally, the theme is always about startups, right? How do you find a market space that you could put your product in, right? What problem can you solve for the wider market, right? However, the challenge for me always was, but what if you are in a bigger company? All right. So like, how do you do this here? And if your product is internal product, for example, like, how do you do things? I think that information wasn't available very readily like 9 years ago. Like not every company is a startup, right? And how do you apply this? So I feel like now when I see many of the articles, a lot of thought and conversation are becoming about like SaaS products as well. How do you run for big companies? How do you do this for big companies as well? I think that's like one of the biggest change I've seen. So yeah, but practices probably have
Yeah,
changed as well. But I think the foundation and fundamentals have stayed the same, right? We're still problem solvers, right? Find the right problem, find the right solution, and test it out, and kind of see how it goes, right? It's kind of fundamental of it stays the same.
absolutely, absolutely. And of course, now that we have AI, which is everywhere, and I'm sure now product is also accelerating a lot since we have information catered to the problem specifically, and you can actually drive a lot of solutions on that. So at the moment today, how are you leading your teams with AI being in
That's a great
place?
question. AI has been, I think, the past 6 months for us like a super important topic in the company. Even even our CTO Sumit was sharing a lot in, I think, in LinkedIn and outside as well, that we are building our own solutions for it. And we just had a hackathon not long ago to kind of look at problem spaces sorry, where we can apply it. One of them was like, I didn't even think about it really, but my team came up with this innovation themselves. They regrouped themselves. They took the PM, they took the engineers. It's like, okay, like, let's find something in our operations space to tinker on. And then they really like looked at, okay, for example, could we predict, I don't know, the volumes that go through our warehouse and look at how many workers we need in which processes. And these things are like, wow, I didn't think that could be done, but like the team came together and actually like enabled that or thought about it. So I do see that it comes from the leaders who believe that this is important, which comes from our CTO, of course, right? And
Yeah,
brings and enables that space and time for us to explore. I think that was the winning factor, right? We can all read
yeah,
about all of these AIs, but if you're not given that time and space to do anything about it, right, besides your work, then it can be just a nice idea. So all of these innovations need like a
Yeah,
buy-in,
absolutely.
right, collectively. And I think for us, the winning factor is that our management is bought into it, and all of us are looking at, well, let's leverage, let's use, let's optimize, let's be smart and go together with all of this technology comes our way. Because the moment you don't do that, you will be just like wiped out, right? Next guys will come and just use it and
Absolutely.
do it better, right? So I feel like that's like the way we
Yes.
approached it collectively, that we just made the time and space for it.
That's amazing. And before we zoom out, I would just also love to understand, like at the moment, Estonia has the most
Yeah.
unicorns per capita, right? And it's extremely forward in the tech space, in the product space. There are robots, like everywhere. Deliveries happening through robots, etc., etc. Why did you choose Malaysia when you know that Estonia is like so far ahead? Like, what brings you to Malaysia? Would love to
I
understand that.
think that time 9 years ago, we didn't yet have those robots on the roads. So I think the only big companies, I actually don't remember when like the Bolt and all of these came and started to like, really push through, right? I think they were later when I left already Estonia. So that time I
Mm,
wasn't also consciously like looking around like on other technology companies because I necessarily didn't know exactly what I want to do.
yeah,
So, but the crave
yeah,
for international exposure, I think, was stronger, right? It was like, I want to see what's outside because Estonia is also quite small, right? We can very progressive, but we're still small. And really thinking in,
yeah,
you know, how to say, like in a smaller scale, right? And for me, like going completely opposite side of the world, like being exposed to like totally different culture and space was the one that brought me here. And I was just curious. I didn't know how long we're gonna stay, of course, here. But then the journey took its own turn. I was like, hey, actually, it's quite cool here, and all of my career has been progressing here very well. And I found my space. And I think why I stayed
yeah.
when I found Zalora as well. I always had a little bit thing with fashion. Even when I was a kid, I was
Yes,
drawing, like some fashion design, during school and, etc. It's always been there. But now I could combine the fashion and the technology space together, which was like an moment for me that kind of made me stay here. So I was just curious at first when I came to work for Mind Valley. I really wanted to work for Mind Valley as well. And their headquarters was here. So that was why I came. They were here, but I stayed for other reasons. So yeah.
that's a that's mind blowing. Thank you for answering that, Haley. But let's just zoom out a bit because I would love to also understand the things that Zalora is doing. Because I'm sure whoever is listening to it in Southeast Asia would know what Zalora does. But for the listeners who don't know what Zalora is, would you be able to share with me what is the problem that Zalora solves
All
today?
right. We are bringing to the end customers the best fashion assortment, I guess, available for in these markets. And secondly, for our
Hmm.
merchants or sellers, right, we are the partner to help to distribute optimally in all of those countries we operate in. I think that's like in a short term. Our tagline is the fashion destination of Southeast Asia. So the destination can be for both, right, consumers and also our merchant partners. So for us, it is that many of the countries that we operate in, which is 6 countries we operate in, right, today, that, for example, Indonesia, it's very hard to get your imports into Indonesia. They always change the regulations. And if you are like a standalone, maybe European or whichever other country merchant and want to enter Indonesia, then actually partnering with Zalora means that we have already figured out all of the routes, all the licensing, the import laws, like we have logistics in place so you can leverage on that network that we have. And for consumers as well, is that we bring those bigger brands, international brands, into their country, which creates there an opportunities to express themselves through, you know, more various, clothing, right? So it goes into the fashion philosophy for me a little bit. But yeah, that's why what we
Yes.
exist for, right? To give those options for customers and also our merchant partners.
That's beautiful. So what you're saying is that you are spreading self-expression through fashion, and just making it available in every region at the moment in Southeast Asia. But of course, if it grows, it we will
Exactly.
find out about that. So, and of course, what you do mainly on a mobile app and also a website. So product becomes a big part of course, Zalora. But that is the B2C side. What is the B2B side that you
Right.
handle?
So for B2B, we have also a portal, which is called Seller Center, where you as a merchant can operate your business in Zalora platform as well. So it's a dropship model, for example, right? So that you can just list your products, build your shop in Zalora, and expose it to all six markets we operate in from one place, right? So it kind of
Mm.
helps with that. However, we run also a lot of different other business models which they can also use and opt into. For example, another one which is our partner services, whereby if you don't have yourself the capabilities, maybe or scalable capabilities for warehousing and logistics, then you could partner with us to say that we do Zalora like fulfillment for you, which means that you can still list and operate all of
Mm.
your products yourself and your pricing, right? But you send your products into a warehouse, and then we host them for you. We pick, pack, ship them for you because we have the volumes, we have the know-how. Then it is way more easier for the maybe smaller brands to use that option, right? And then they can still use us as a channel,
Yeah.
but also fulfillment partner, right? So these are like kind of some of the solutions that we
Mm.
have built for our partners that they can use, right? And then yeah, then even another on top of that, for example, is our one stock solution, which means that once you have maybe tried us out, right, you have placed your stock in our warehouse already. But then you're like, well, Zalora is like one channel only, right? But as a merchant, well, you want to sell in Shopee, in Lazada, maybe your brand.com, you have so many of them, and then you need to start segregating your own stock where you're like, okay, I'll put a little bit to Zalora warehouse, a little bit here, a little bit there, right? Because you want to make sure that your exposure to all of those channels is maximized, right? But then you run into problems how
Yeah.
to predict how much stock should you reserve for different channels, and then how to manage all of that. So basically, we then built last year or 2 years a solution for that, that we aggregate all of that together. And when you tell us that, okay, you want to fulfill all of channels, we're like, great, we can put the integrations in place and your stock sits in one warehouse and we fulfill all of your orders. And you can have an availability to see then some of the stats in the Seller Center platform, right? So it kind of gives you that roundabout view in Southeast Asia between all of those shops and channels that you operate in, while stock sits in one place and is optimized fulfillment and also logistics for you.
That's amazing. So if I'm a seller today, I just have to focus on building my product and also delivering it to your warehouse and your center. As soon as I do that, from that point onwards, I can forget about my inventory. Do I also have to manage my store on Zalora, or that is also managed by Zalora
So
itself?
we have various, also again, we have diversified so much, right? We have various options for you. You can opt in also for that we will take care of the shops, especially as well on the, for example,
Mm.
Lazada's and Shopee. We have multitudes of customers who are like, well, we don't know exactly like how to best run the strategies there, right? Because there's a lot of like, how do you get exposure? How do you get your clicks up there, right? How do you sell optimally there? So we also have those services to help out because we're both already doing it for Zalora, but also through the other platforms, we've already been doing that as well. So we do that as a service as well for you. So all of them are available. Yeah,
That's amazing. So it's like a one
in a
stop
sense.
shop. So
Yeah.
I just need to focus on what I do best. I build the product and make it as best as I could, and the rest is
That's what
handled
we're
by
aiming for,
Zalora.
yeah, to be the one partner in Southeast Asia to help you out because, like, as you know, like Southeast Asia is very diverse, right? You think about Indonesia versus Philippines, Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Malaysia, right? All of us have different markets, different shops. I think Indonesia is one of the most diverse as well. They have a lot of different general merchandise platforms there, right? And figuring all of that out when you try to enter Southeast Asia or try to expand in here, maybe you're in one of them, but you want to expand. it can take a while, right, for you to figure it out. So if you have like these kind of solutions available, which leverages on our strengths, right? We've done this already before. We have figured some things out at least. So it shortens your, I guess, yeah, your reach and all of the efforts that you need to put in yourself as a merchant.
Amazing. And when we look at B2B versus B2C, of course, like in Zalora's case, they work hand in hand, right? If you don't have sellers, you won't be able to cut into as many customers as you do
Correct.
now, right? So it's always um, one or the other. It's always together. It's never B2C or B2B. For your case, it's always B2B
Correct.
and B2C together, because of course sellers are the ones who are driving the product. Do you also look at the business side of B2B? Because, of course, like whatever services that you talked about, these services are not
Correct.
free, I'm sure, right? Like if the seller has to be availing those services, but of course, like it must be extremely cheap compared to if that seller had to get a warehouse, had to do storage, had to do packaging, versus Zalora, which has done and does that on mass, where the cost must be a lot lower. So when you're building that product, do you look at the business side as well within your team, or is it somebody else who's
So
looking
we
into
are in
it?
a very close partnership. So if you think about like for you to have a good walk, right, you need two legs. So I think here is the same case, right? So our business partners team is the one who is on a lookout always and is at close contact with all the merchants and all the sellers and partners, right? So they will get the insights through those negotiations and conversations, right? Like what really is needed for them on a day-to-day basis. And with product internal, we will work together with them where we're like, okay, so what is emerging there and what can we then provide
Yeah.
for these kind of solutions? And quite often we are also like in a partnership to figure out how we can test these things, right? So not always we build straight
Yeah.
away. Like for example, in this one stock solution case, when we started off it, and actually I built the first, I remember it was 2020, I built the first connections that we built for this one SS with Lazada and Shopee. So this is like my little, you know, my little legacy in Zalora that I always go back to, and now to see like 2, 3 years later that how big it has become, right? It's kind of mind blowing. But
Right.
we tested it out. Like
Yes.
where it started was like we didn't build proprietary solution for it straight. We were like, okay, we have this feel that it kind of, is a space that could, bring us closer to the goal we have as a company. So let's test it out. Let's use a third party solution for it first. So we used like an integration partner for ourselves first, and then we started to see like, well, that works, this model, right? And it kind of brings us the value, the money, and the margins that we want. So let's make sure that then now is the time to build ourselves, because that business is going to be a huge thing for us, as we saw from the projections. And we can't necessarily rely on a third party like solution and put all of that dependency there. It became like a risk for us, right? And then we're like, okay, now is a time for us to
Hmm.
evaluate, look, and we already saw them, so the business growth, they saw the numbers, the projections, what other companies were in the pipeline for us, right, as partners. And it's like, okay, it's a time. And we made that call to build proprietary solution for it
Yeah.
as well.
Amazing. And you talked about Lazada and Shopee multiple times. So what is that connection that you guys have built? Because to me, as an
Hmm.
end user, I see Zalora, Lazada, and Shopee as
Hmm.
competitors. But what you're saying is that you guys have a partnership, especially for sellers. What is that partnership about, and how is that
All
integrated with
right.
Zalora?
So it's completely true what you said. From outside world, it looks like, well, these are all channels, right? In general, I wouldn't say necessarily that they are our competitors, because Zalora has a very specific niche, right? We are doing fashion e-commerce, right? We
Yeah.
focus on apparel, your shoes, accessories, etc., lifestyle as well, right? But it's a niche there. For Lazada and Shopee, they are general merchandisers. So where you can buy from, I don't know, from pens to tents, right? And everything in between, right? So that's the difference there. But the connection point for us is like when you are placing an order in Lazada, maybe you're buying your dress or maybe pants from there, right? then reality, those orders will be
Hmm.
synchronized from Lazada to our internal Zalora warehouse systems. And this order will be
That's
picked, packed, shipped
crazy.
within our warehouse, and then will be sent back. So we build those integrations between order flows, order status flow, stock exposure.
Hmm.
Because, for example, if our warehouse out of stock, then also the product wouldn't list in Zalora, sorry, in Lazada or Shopee, right? So the same goes also
Hmm.
brand.coms, which means that if you have a brand.com, right, then all of that stock inventory, levels, the orders, the order statuses, logistics information, right, all of that will be passed through from Lazada's, Shopee's, brand.coms into our internal systems where we do all of the handling and then just expose that, information back to the end customer. So then the customer doesn't even know that it comes from maybe Zalora's warehouse. They just think they purchased some whatever, whichever shop there was. So this is,
That's
yeah,
that's incredible. So it works essentially like this. So Zalora gets the sellers, and then you are posting them on your website, on your app. But not only that, it also goes and it also gets listed on Shopee, Lazada, brand.com, and whatever orders you get from them, then it channels back to your system, and then you pack, and then you ship, and then the seller gets the
correct.
commission or whatever the percentage that the seller receives. Um, that is amazing. I did not know that this happens. So when you're packaging the product, are you branding it with Zalora or
That is
is it
generic.
something
We
else?
do a separation because, like all of the brand partners, so it actually is called brand partner services, right? Even in LinkedIn, you can find our brand partner services page about all of these things. But they wouldn't want to
Mm.
have our packaging, right? They don't want the customers to know that, oh, there was a Zalora involved in this transaction, right? Because it's a back office kind of thing. It's not the customer that needs to know, so we just use generic packages. Our stations are separated, so we can do that. Yeah.
That's amazing. And when we look at B2C side of things, essentially, who is your main competitor in Southeast Asia?
Oh, there are some of these branded coms who actually are bigger, either sports brands, right, or some other like apparel companies, right? They have figured their branded coms out already. I think these are like direct competitors. There are also some fashion-oriented, like Shane, right, kind of companies as well that could be in a certain segment competing for us, not necessarily on a
Yeah.
global scale because our target market and our demographics for our consumers are a little bit different than theirs. But yeah, there are definitely like these fashion-oriented companies. I wouldn't list all of them right now, but yeah, or some of the brand coms that we work with also necessarily can't disclose. um, but yeah, like these are like the ones. The general merchandisers, they are not direct competitors for us, but we need to pay attention to them, right? Because the way they maybe run their shops, right, or strategies, and our sellers and merchants are exposed to these experiences, right? This also means that it routes back to us where people start asking about certain maybe capabilities or features, or it inspires us to see that, oh wait, there is an opportunity in a back office space where we could actually connect some more, right, or do something more interesting for our brand
Yeah.
partners to ease their pains. So yeah, it's like it's paying attention, but
Mm.
necessarily not direct competitors. And all of the branded coms, they will pay attention to. We're always like eyes and ears on the ground, right? Is this somewhere else somebody coming and wanting to,
Always.
do something bigger, right? And then we learn from it and pivot, right? That's actually one of the most amazing things I feel for Zalora, that we can pivot fast, even though it's a big company. But internally, people are, I would say, like hustlers sometimes. Especially when, as an example, when the COVID hit, like 2020, right? We had this, threats that our warehouse will be shut down because we are not essential goods, right? And then we figured out internally how to keep ourselves quickly, alive with marketplace, right, with quickly onboarding sellers and drop shippers who can give us that inventory that constitutes as, essential goods, so we can keep on continuing working and keeping everything, up and running, and also helping, of course, the wider wider customers right outside who didn't at that time need maybe apparel. They needed masks and sanitizers, right? So we pivoted straight away very quickly there. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I'm actually just taking a pause here quick because I'm losing you. Can you check your internet if it's
Sure.
fine? Because I think there is a bit of a lag coming from your
Ooh,
side.
okay. Let me like just quickly a moment. I'll then maybe open my door.
And it just happened like a few
Mm,
seconds ago, but not in the
okay.
entire interview.
I think that sometimes it may fluctuate. Right now, I see I'm like full bars. So let's see. Is it okay right now?
Hmm. Okay,
Okay.
it's perfect now. Perfect.
No
Okay,
worries.
let's restart. Cool. Um, Amazing. And would love to know, would you be able to share how many sellers do you have on the platform
Oh, that's a good
today?
question. We did a cleanup, I remember. I think it's somewhere close to like it's a couple of hundreds or thousand, probably. Different
Okay.
sizes, of course, right? Like on the itself, Zalora.com, I think there is like a lot, but the exact number, I'm like, I wouldn't necessarily know.
Okay. Okay. So, like hundreds of thousands is a big number. And when you're building a product for resellers, for your sellers, of course, there has to be an acquisition side of it. And then there is also a retention side of it. And then you have a lot of these programs. When it comes to acquisition, what are your main strategies to acquire these resellers, and how does the product play a part in that?
Product necessarily, if we talk about IT system product management that we have, so this one doesn't play a huge role, I feel, in terms of like on a day-to-day basis. So we have our account managers and our
Yeah,
business side of in the company, right? The teams who do the acquisitions. So they will.
yeah,
I've asked them as well. So how do you guys go about it? So sometimes it's about a little bit like word of mouth if it's a smaller sellers, right? Or
yeah,
we really just skim through and see maybe other platforms. We see what's emerging. We also do research in different countries, like for example, countries in Europe, right? What kind of fashion brands are, getting exposure there, which are more interesting that we would want to bring in and give the opportunity for the customers in these markets also get the hands on those goods, right? So we're looking at the trends and the companies emerging, but it's also in a price point that kind of makes sense for us, right? Because many of the customers, for example, Indonesia, Malaysia, right, Philippines, the average, kind of, disposable income is not comparable in amount value to Europe, right? So the price points, when we bring it in, it might be complete lux category for people here. So definitely that's one of those things that we'll look at, right? Whether the price is okay, how the fashionability of those products is, and to bring them in here into Southeast Asia as well. So yeah, they will look at all of these things as
got it.
well, and of course size and volume. That makes sense for us as or kind of as well because we can't host like a lot of small sellers because the maintenance of keeping all of that up and running or if they face problems right is takes a lot of efforts for us and resources, so we try to focus also on what we call on
Hmm.
short and medium tail sellers, which means that their volumes are there which will match also with our needs, right? If you think about it, we have six countries, right, that we operate in. We have like probably millions of customers, right? So if your inventory availability or your product availability is very limited, right, then we can't distribute. Like the moment we maybe post, it's already gone, right? It's also not a good exposure to them, to the customers. So we try to get brands
Hmm.
who have the right kind of demographics, right, of things and the product, but also has a volume behind it that we can distribute it if we choose to sell it and push it in our countries.
Amazing. And when you're looking at this product overall, what are the main metrics that you look at to be always improving and to be making sure that the product is working as it should be.
Okay, now just a quick definition of product, right? So product, we talk about the platform, right? Not the goods that we sell, right?
Yes, yes, yes. I'm purely
Right.
talking about the B2B side of things now, because you see, like a lot of the people know the
Mm-hmm.
B2C side. They see, okay, there's a website, there is an app, and I'm sure a lot of the people who are listening would also know that, okay, in B2C side we look at DAUs, MAUs, average order values, like time to checkout, etc., etc., etc. How many people put how much in the cards? How is the cart
Mm-hmm.
functioning, blah blah blah. So all of these conversion metrics, but on the B2B side it's unique, right? Because of course B2B is driving all of that, because especially if sellers are being able to post their products, the more products we have, the more availability we have, the more variety we have, the more customers would look at what is suitable for them, right? Like some people like mango, some people like Zara. So if you have all of that, then they can actually compare and be like, okay, bravo, I'll just get that product. But essentially on B2B side, people don't really talk about metrics, right? Like, okay, onboarding, we should look at these kind of metrics. For engagement, we should look at these kind of metrics. We should have this education so that reseller or a seller can do XYZ. So for you, especially when you're building that product and improving that product, what is that metric, or bunch of metrics
All
that you
right.
look at?
So from the top, of course, the biggest and the so-called like the vanity metric problem, right, is the NMV or the revenue that is brought in, right, by those sellers, either projected, right, beforehand, or then, of course,
Mm.
later how the actual sales are going through. Then you have the inventory availability, right? You also check how quickly do they run out of stock, right? So can they provide this particular
Mm.
products and the volume that we need them to or not? Definitely, there is also seller engagement, right? That we look at, or also the NPS scores of them. How do they, and
Yes.
also how do they fulfill? So sometimes not everything is with Zalora or in our warehouse. If you are a normal drop shipper on our platform, then we need to look at you that, okay, how fast do you get your items shipped out? Like how long is your lead time? Because we have a promise to our end customers lead time to be an XYZ. So then they need to uphold to it.
Yeah.
Then we also look at like if certain metrics are not met, we might delist you as well, right? Because we need to make sure that our front end is clean there as well. We look at return rates, right? So how much of your items actually get returns, because there's might be a reason for it, right?
Yeah.
We do have like this very flexible
Mhm.
return in Zalora, right? 30 days on most of the inventory, because you want to, encourage people to try and find the right things that they want. However, we do pay attention, like
Absolutely.
why do certain brands get like maybe 50% of compared to something else that has maybe 20% and 10% returns. So is there a problem of fit in
Hmm.
terms of like that particular models, or cuts don't fit the consumers, or what's the
Yeah.
reason? So depending on that journey of the seller together with the customer, right, where the customers are and where they're buying. So we measure those, steps there to figure out, for example, cancellations rate, right? If it's canceled by the seller, right? That you're like, wait, why did they cancel? Why didn't they like fulfill these things, right? What's happening on their side? Are they reliable in terms of like their, operations? Or maybe it is an indicator that yes, they can't fulfill that kind of volume. However, then we can help them the service, right? So like, hey, let us help you out. Like you
Yeah.
can put it maybe in the
Yeah.
warehouse and we can do it for you, right? So these are the like one of these,
Yeah.
like more granular ones that we look at in there in the operation space, because it also connects with sellers. If they put the inventory into our warehouse, then in the warehouse itself, we always look at productivity, right? Items per hours we can pick and pack, like how fast we can process, the accuracy of things as well, like how many mistakes so called are made, right? And then you go from there to optimize your operations as well. Because as we scaled so much over the like even the past 5 years in terms of our warehouse space even, that that changes completely your operations as well, right? And making sure you keep that pace of
Yeah.
efficiency, that you can keep on going with a certain number of items processed on every given hour. right? So these are like some of the things on the seller side,
Amazing.
and also then on the
Mm.
operation side.
Amazing. And how do you? Sorry, I'm throwing questions back to back because my mind is
Blown.
just absorbing all of that. I'm loving. Yes. See, because you're running such a massive operation, right? And to run it smoothly, you need systems that can actually guardrail, like diversify, improve, and can make life easier for sellers and, of course, the company itself and eventually the customer too. Um, how do you innovate on the B2B side? What are those touch points that you use to find out that, okay, this is the place that we can innovate and this is where we'll work on this
All
quarter?
right. It all comes through, of course, one stream is from the business side, as I told before, like through those conversations that we always have with the sellers and merchants. Then also we have a team called like seller help desk. We look at like, so what are maybe some of the challenges they reach out with that could be an indicator of maybe necessarily not innovation, but also like saying like, hey, there's something not completely working well in terms of maybe product or order synchronization,
Mm,
right? Because I told you, like in a B2B space, we have always these multitudes of external platforms connecting internally, and then seeing like how is the seamless connection system wise that it doesn't break down or slow down with volumes, right? We always look at like, can we sustain volumes? Because right now, like 1111 is on the corner. So I don't know if you know, but 1111 is a huge thing. So that is a 10x volumes for us,
definitely.
even sometimes more volumes that go through.
Ready
Yeah,
with my
right.
credit card.
Cart is waiting, right? So our warehouse is also waiting. So we do always see the spaces for innovation in during the volumes, right? We see like what kind of indicates if we are in that moment of peak, right? Then you do a retrospective and find, okay, so can we optimize something for our operations, or also what the seller's needs are? Because you need to be in a constant conversations with them and kind of keeping the tabs right on there, and looking for indicators of what may be there that is not working well, or like this is like coming
Yeah.
from what's happening today and how do we kind of optimize it, right, and bringing some new solutions in. But
Yeah.
then the innovation comes like completely for me as well when I just kind of absorb information from outside world, right, and look at
Mm,
other, for example, I found there's a website that tries to provide a solution that, for example, if you run out of stock, right, yourself as a platform or as a brand partner, then you can tap into this endless connection point of stock, that if somebody else carries the same brand, they can become a source for you, that so your website still continues selling, but you just make a commission out of it. It's not coming out of your warehouse, but it comes from a partner warehouse. So it's like this endless connection kind of mechanism that they have figured out also with some AI tools, right? So that is something. Then you start thinking about how do you keep the stock and the brands on site as much and as long as possible,
mm,
and the size availability, right? Because it goes back to the customer, right? Like without what you said, like sellers, we need to have customers, but customers also kind of need to have the availability, right? So it's kind of, both sides together. So we always think from the end consumer side as well. Like they would go and shop somewhere else if I don't have a size for you, right? S is out of stock, but I am always S, right? So what can we do as a company
yes.
to have that S available as much as long as possible? So we have these mechanisms of fallbacks, right? We have
Mm,
automations internally, which we also innovated on to make sure that if we are out of stock, then somebody else has stock. Let's connect to that. If that's out of stock, then somebody else is out of in stock, right? So we automatically switch it so that for you, it's just like, okay, like it's always available for me. But behind that's a lot of work to make it
yeah.
available for you. So we are looking usually like for the innovation
Yeah.
space, either from consumer point of view, like what do they need and what needs to be in place from the B2B side to enable that, right? So there's always connection point, or what do the sellers ask for, or what they are exposed to, or some other market. For example, if the seller is coming from Europe, right? We are so used to like how we operate here in Southeast Asia, and all of the sellers may be asking similar things. But then when we start to talk to, sellers from other markets, then we're like, oh, wait, but there is, for example, Zalando in Europe, right? Or some other platforms. So what are they exposed to and what is the learnings we can, have there? And then, yeah, I think it's observation portion of things as well. How do we look for innovation and ideas as well?
Yeah. So the thing that you talked about, which connects different sellers, whoever has the stock can actually provide. Did you get to implement that?
This one, I am yet to have a conversation with these guys. we have internally we have internal
Okay.
mechanism which already does the part that I told you, right? So we can tap into our retail or drop shipping sources, right, very easily. But exposing that to a wider area, so this one is yet under exploration. That I was thinking like, let's look at that. So this is like an innovation space. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's a great discovery for a company like you, because I'm sure that we, especially B2C ecom platform, loses a lot of the customers just because they're
Correct.
out of stock. Because of course, like, everybody knows what they want, and when they want it, and they like, I go to Zalora, I like a product, I just
Mm-hmm.
don't find the size. I get out, I go to Google, find the same product, find the size, and
Exactly.
just buy it. So essentially, you are selling it to me, and you have sold me the product, but I'm just not being able to buy it on your side
Exactly.
because it's sold out. But would love to also know, Haley, like, if you can share at least one or two examples of an innovation that you guys found and which had a massive impact on the B2B side.
Let me think about. I mean, the latest one or biggest one is the one actually I told you about, right? That was innovation of that partner services that we went like double, triple down there, right? And we built the proprietary software for it, and now like running all of that
Um,
pillar. I think that's the biggest thing I can say. Like that shifted the company
yes,
because that is now one of the main pillars for us, which wasn't the case 3 years ago, right? So
that's
that's
great.
something that kind of came out of let's test it out, and then now we are here, right? So that's the biggest one. I guess for a warehouse space, we are innovating always like in incrementals. I feel that we are observing what's tweaking here, what's tweaking there to make it more optimal. But then when the size comes, right, we, for example, doubled our space in the warehouse, we need to rethink like our algorithms, right, that run and route the people in the warehouse because we have the routing algorithms that, do that,
Yeah.
right? So that's something that we need to then look at as well. Or we have, I call it even as like a space innovation, right? It's because like you have a limited amount of space actually in the warehouse, right? So how do you now place things there, right? How do you understand how people move in the warehouse, in which order like it's most optimal there, in which conveyor belts you use, right? Which where do you put the stations? How do you make things visible for
Hmm.
people? So that's constant improvement. Maybe it's like innovation, a big word, and I feel like this means like a groundbreaking innovations, but actually like the constant improvement happens all the time. That is helping to bring this operations and keeping it up to bar with the business and the growth of the business. So yeah, for me that's like the biggest one. I feel that on top of my head, other things I would need to like start thinking about. Definitely there's more, and I'm like, it's
No,
not
but these
coming on
are
top of my head.
No, but these are incredible, right? Like, just being able to discover a way to actually list your products in another platform and then, routing it back to Zalora, which is incredible because essentially you don't have to market that. Somebody else is already marketing it. Somebody else, the traffic is already there. All you're doing is routing it back to your platform, which is just mind blowing to me. And when it comes to innovation, what kind of tests do you guys do? These are usually split tests. You do group learnings. You do user testing. What are methodologies that you guys use today in Zalora to test the product?
B2C side, all of the usual things, right? B2B side is a little bit difficult, right? Or different. So what I deal with a lot is business model innovations, right? And routing, and how do you put all of the operations, differently together. Like, for example, right, we are like, okay,
Yeah.
like what if we bring the goods, I don't know, from Hong Kong, to Malaysia, and then we ship it out to, other countries versus doing direct. Like these kind of things, like, so, like, how to test this. So you test it on paper, right? Of course, you run
Mm.
analysis in terms of cost, and, like all of these things that you just see what makes sense, for this kind of routing or operations for you. Some of the business models that we bring maybe goods in, from other countries, from Europe into here, we do just, we need to do some bets, right? And we look at like how can we test it out with the least technical, setups first. So we always call like it's like a manual testing. Like, for example, this, maybe even this Shopee and Lazada case at the beginning, right? We started with manually exporting the orders and then putting them into a platform and then fulfilling them, right? Because we didn't have the connections of
Yeah.
integrations yet, and we weren't sure it's going to pay off. So you start with small volumes and test kind of,
Yeah.
the flow out and see like, is there traction? And then only, oh, there is, then you build maybe just the next, next, layer through what we did, our third party, integrations, right? And then we're like, okay, this kind of works out, and then you build on top of that for proprietary. So it's a lot of that you need to invest still, I feel, in B2B space into operational models before you prove it that, okay, this really works. But it's not an A/B test, right? It's not something easy. You can say, okay, like this design versus that design, because operational model testing takes way more people, right? It's an operational flow you
Yeah.
need to plug into. And you always, we have always our, of course, our operations guys, and, also their business side guys. They're always very like quick on their feet to think, how could we test this? Like without technology
Yeah.
or with the current technologies they do have, right? So the business model, or like the routing, I call it, like the innovation is one of the hardest to test without investment. So there's a little bit investment needed. And then we have also had cases where we did invest a little bit more, and then we're like, oh, okay, it didn't work. Well, okay, then it's a learning, right? And then we need to like reroute and do things. But we try to minimize this big bets because, like always we hope that new business models will bring us millions, right? And sometimes the reality doesn't hit that. But we invested, let's say, technology wise, like maybe like, I don't know, 2 quarters worth of work there, which a lot of money has gone into, like, building certain things. So that's where I come in as well, always questioning that, or like, question to learn, right? That when they bring those business cases, like how can we not build it but still test it, right? And then we look at everything we have
Mm.
already in house, workarounds, and just work with that.
Makes sense. Yeah. And usually before testing, do you build an MVP, or not even that, and then you just try to test the concept first?
Most cases, it's kind of an MVP kind of thing, because there is no concept testing in operations. Like you can't run it, right?
Mm.
Only if you do it manual, like
Yeah.
complete, like out of like your operational flows, and we can call that like concept testing. But other than that, like
Yeah.
it kind of, it needs to do a bet already that, okay, we'll do something, and it needs to run, because otherwise you can't plug it into your operational flows, right? Like how to send an order to warehouse and pick back ship, right?
Absolutely.
Kind of need
Exactly.
that thing
Exactly.
there, right? So it's a completely different way of, so-called
Absolutely.
testing, right? It's predicting, analyzes, a little bit least effort testing, and then kind of seeing, do you have positive indicators, right? And then you build upon on it that.
Yeah. And you have been in product career for almost 9 years,
Oh
right?
my
Almost a
God,
decade,
I feel
right?
so old now.
Almost. No, like I get fascinated because, see, like you are a specialist, right? Like you are trying to crack the problems that at the moment the customer might not see. Being so important and critical for a business unit, how do you make sure that you yourself are growing Because of course, like if you want to operate, if you want to look at those innovations, if you want to be innovating fast, and of course like making sure your team is innovating fast and they are growing, the number one thing that you have to do is grow yourself, right? Like how do you do that, and day on day, what is it that you do?
All right. Yeah, I think from the growth perspective, it starts first you as a leader making time for this. So just this week, I was super on a roll in investigating my calendar to making sure first that I have time and space for innovation and consuming new information, which I think is important to grow and bring the innovation in, right? So you need to have the time and space within your calendar, in your head as well. So usually start
Hmm.
from that. Then once I have the space, then I was also thinking of like looking at the problem areas or a little bit like bigger strategies, right? What's going to be the next 6, maybe 12 months and also 3 years down the road. And then what I do as well is that I look at a lot of news, I guess. So I have this Google alerts that I go through, on a weekly basis, for example, where certain keywords, right, like e-commerce or fashion technology or whichever is like interested or what I would like to learn about. So I look at the big platforms to see news about these things as well. And definitely LinkedIn is one of my source where I look what others are doing and talking about, following people and companies that are on that cutting edge of things. I get very excited about fashion technology in general in different various spaces, like even looking at things like 3D modeling of garments and how now you don't need to anymore make photos of 2D garments, but you just do it 3D. You can touch them, poke them, move them, right? It can, when you design a garment, for example, on a particular software, you can apply gravity to it, so it silk looks different than your velvet, for example. So I'm looking at areas which are not necessarily like innovating my warehouse, right?
Hmm.
But I am thinking about as a B2B and operations, head of product, I'm not looking at just, like that, in my space. I'm thinking still about what's around it, right? How do we create garments? How do we, like, what would the consumers find, interesting? How we can innovate also for that space? Because all of that, if you look outside and are excited about, right, then it kind of fuels you and sparks ideas for you to then bring it to your operations and to your merchants as an idea, right? And to see how you innovate from there. So I do believe that innovation and self-growth starts, of course, from discovery, but it's in sparks, like some emotion or curiosity or like this, positivity in you. Then you will see options, right? You can't force innovation from a space of like either operational overwhelmment or if you are like not inspired yourself. I feel that's where it kind of comes from, and that's the tools that I use as well. I just look around and search different terms, and then I get to know about this fascinating world of fashion technology and in e-commerce as well, because it all merges for me.
Yes, and even besides that, I like these are great points for people to really nourish their professional side and keep learning on what their space is, how their space is evolving, and what are the newer technologies, newer things that they can learn from, which can make their work better, faster, and even smarter. What about the personal side of things? What about body, mind? How do you take care of that? Because essentially, if you're grounded, then of course um, you can operate on levels which are stress free, and you have a clearer mind. um, do you also take time out for your own self, and how do you take care of all of that?
That's an amazing question. It's one of the, the ones also I'm very passionate about.
Yes.
So how do I do that? I do a lot of self-reflection on the go or also maybe sometimes on the weekends when I journal and sit down and think like, okay, what did I feel this week? Right? And then I reflect upon the moments that maybe I didn't feel so great, or I noticed that I was feeling frustrated, or I was feeling angry or fear. And then I explore that within myself and with my writing to see that what's behind that, to unlock it and see like, well, that fear comes from XYZ because I don't know about something. then what's the resolution to that? So I try to resolve these so-called indicators of emotions for myself. That is one of my self-growth tools that I use, is observation and writing. Then, of course, I also consume quite a bit. It goes, how to say, up and down the consumption, right, based on the time and space I'm in currently. But I listen to podcasts, right, as well. Recently, I was listening to Mel Robbins quite a lot in terms of like also like understanding, yourself. And I feel like a lot of like these podcasts which are more authentic, that I just, like
Yeah.
just be true to yourself, right? And these ones I like and then I follow. Of course, I also have my physical practices, right? I go and I walk quite a bit, where I feel that innovation and great ideas come when you walk. It's like a mystery, or like this way of
Yes.
unlocking my brain. uh,
Showers and walks.
Showers and walk, exactly. And fun fact, just fun fact for you, was that September, we call it in Zalora, this challenge is called September. So for 3 weeks, we had a competition that everybody was like, not everybody, but a lot of people, like over 100 people, were like competing in step counts. And
Mm.
it pushed me to do like personal records, which I have never done before. So if you haven't been in Putrajaya, I could walk for 6 hours, 40,000 steps around Putrajaya Lake.
Oh
And
my God.
so I just, like, for me, it's also one of these like personal challenges, like physical challenges. And through that and these kind of walks and pushes, right, it kind of taught me like, well, there's a lot of focus that can go into things. And then, innovative ideas could come from personal growth, can come from this kind of, personal challenges. So I like these challenges things as well.
Yes.
So, and I also do martial arts. So a little bit like practice that part of myself as well, like how to tackle fear. Right.
Hmm.
So these things all combined, I guess, help me along. Some books occasionally. So yeah, I balance these things.
How about roller skating?
Oh, you saw my Instagram.
Of course, I do my research.
Yes, so I am a former competitive roller skater, or artistic roller skater. So
Incredible.
I did that for many, many years when I was growing up. Then I think about 2 years ago, I brought my roller skates to Malaysia. And then I was also a little bit teaching that, and I was practicing and doing this. And now it's in a hobby format for me, that I don't post so much about it, but then I will go and roller skate as well, like in various places. So yeah, that's also my hobby, but it's not on top of my head right now.
Amazing.
That's why I was like, I forgot about that.
Amazing. It was a pleasure having you here, Haley. Like, we learned a lot about product and how it actually plays such a big part in the business. Before we let you go, would love to get some final words from you. Like, if you want to succeed in your career in this day and age, how should your mindset be?
Oh, I love it. So mindset should be open. And I would say that one of the winning strategies is to make sure that you observe yourself and face yourself as honestly as
Hmm.
possible. Because anything outside you can, tackle if you can tackle internal first. So that is my takeaway. Like anything, career growth, look at yourself in mirror, be honest, and figure out what makes you fearful or afraid, or whatever the feeling is that you're feeling and it's not bringing you forward, and try to bring the lightness in you, because then everything else falls into place.
That is amazing. Thank you, Haley, for being here. It was a pleasure. We learned a lot, and I'm sure the listeners who are listening and watching would learn a lot from this podcast as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me as well.